So our next presenter is Glassdoor's chief economist. And what'll be cool about Dr. Andrew Chamberlain's session is when he's done, we actually are going to take some questions from the audience. So similar setup to Lisa's presentation. When Andrew wraps up, he's going to invite you up, and you can just line up at the microphones and ask whatever questions you have. And we'll cover those before we move on to our last session with Arianna Huffington. So Dr. Andrew Chamberlain is the chief economist at Glassdoor. He's an applied labor economist who has written widely on labor markets and public policy. At Glassdoor, he uses crowdsourced big data to illuminate trends in today's labor markets. His recent research has examined the link between company culture and stock performance, and the gender pay gap in Glassdoor salary data, and a variety of hiring and compensation trends. Andrew previously taught economics at the University of California at San Diego. It was the chief economist and founder of Columbia Economics, LLC. Andrew received his PhD in economics from the University of California, San Diego, and holds a Bachelor of Arts degrees in economics and business administration from the University of Washington in Seattle. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Chamberlain to the stage.
Hey, everybody. So today, we're going to talk about CEOs. There's no CEOs in the audience, are there? We could be honest. CEOs are constantly being judged. We do it naturally. But are we judging them the right way? So for the next 20 minutes or so, I want you to join me in thinking about your own career, all the CEOs that you have actually worked with, everyone you've shared a path with. Collect those faces in your mind. Who were the great ones among them, and who are the not so great ones? And I want you to think with me, what really made them a great CEO? So, do you think it was because they had a prestigious academic background? Probably not, right? Was it because they made the stock price rise? Well, maybe. But was it something deeper? Was it something about how they treat people and about the kind of cultural institutions they built at the company, whether they paid attention to a satisfied and engaged workforce? So today, while you're thinking about your list of CEOs in your head that you've had personal experience with, actually watching how they do their jobs and what makes them good or not, I'm going to show you what the research says. I'm going to show you some powerful new findings from data, from Glassdoor data, that really confirm probably what most of us in this room as HR experts already believe, which is that being a great CEO means more than delivering on profits to the company. Sure, you have to run a profitable company, but being a great CEO means more than that. It means cultivating an engaged and satisfied workforce. So most of you traveled to get here, and maybe you stopped in an airport bookstore. If you spent any time going through the business aisle at a bookstore, I don't have to tell you, there's no shortage of books that want to tell you how to be a great CEO. Everyone has an opinion on this, right? Top 5 ways to be a great leader. The problem with most of this research, though, is that it's based on anecdotes, really, case studies, and not hard scientific data about what makes great leaders. And it's not because the authors are trying to mislead people. I think they have good intentions when they're trying to give advice. But it's super hard to measure what makes a good CEO. It's hard to quantify a good versus a bad CEO. That's where Glassdoor data comes in. So Glassdoor has a really unique measure of CEO quality that comes directly from the people who see them most closely in their day-to-day jobs, the people who work with them, the people who watch their failures and watch their successes. They come to Glassdoor, they leave ratings, and they tell us whether they approve or disapprove of their CEO. And over the years, we've collected millions of these reviews for over 580,000 employers. It's a huge amount of data that gives us a very specific quantitative measure of what makes a great CEO or not, from the perspective of employees. And what I'm going to show you today is basically how I spent my summer vacation, which was my glamorous summer vacation as an economist, which was bent over my desk, writing code, working with the data. I'm going to show you 6 findings from my own research on what makes a great CEO in Glassdoor data. And as I show you these 6 findings, like these are 6 statistical findings, right? These are from the math. But I want you to try to relate to them as I walk you through these. I want you to think about your own personal experience with your good and your bad CEOs from your career, and tell me at the end whether these resonated with you, whether you really believe that these capture most of what makes a great CEO. Maybe not everything, but most things. So, first lesson, lesson number 1 from our study. There is a fundamental link between having a satisfied workforce and being a great CEO. They are 2 sides of the same coin. In almost every case we looked at, if you look at high-rated CEOs on Glassdoor, they almost always occur at companies with great employee satisfaction. And conversely, if you look at the lowest-rated CEOs, they almost always occur at companies with below-average employee satisfaction. And so what that's telling us is, if you want to be a great CEO, it is simply not possible without paying attention to the satisfaction of your workforce. You cannot allow employee engagement to deteriorate and still expect to be a great CEO. And if you're wondering how big of an effect this really is, it is a huge effect in our study. So you might wonder, okay, how much would I expect to get a CEO bump if my company goes from being like a 3-star company on Glassdoor to a 4-star company? The effect is really, really big. It's like almost a 37% impact. So what this is telling you then, so when you go home after the Glassdoor Summit and people ask you, what did you learn at the Glassdoor Summit? This is what you can tell them. You can tell them that if you want to be a great CEO, it's not enough to just deliver great financial results. You also have to pay attention to culture at the company. The second lesson from our study is not about the CEO themselves. It is more about the leaders that surround the CEO, the other people in the C-suite. And that result is that no CEO is an island. There is a close statistical link between the quality of the other senior leadership at a company and the CEO's approval rating. And we see this very clearly in the data. And this completely makes sense, right? CEO certainly doesn't run the show themselves. They really are the star, but they really rely on that other management team to push them through. And when employees rate their CEO on Glassdoor, one thing they're doing is they're rating the quality of the senior leaders that CEO has put in place, right? So an example that I like to give of this is Spencer Raskoff at Zillow. So Spencer was only 35 years old when he was made CEO at Zillow, and before that founded Hotwire in his mid-20s. So, that's a tremendous amount of responsibility to have as a 25-year-old or a 35-year-old person. And if you have any humility as a young person, and you're put into that role, you inevitably try to surround yourself with other great leaders. And that is exactly what he does. So when you look at interviews with Spencer, he'll say things like, don't be afraid to hire people smarter than you. And that's exactly what he's done. If you look at Zillow, they have one of the highest rated senior management ratings on Glassdoor, and Spencer himself is one of the best CEOs on Glassdoor with a 96% approval rate. So he illustrates this really nicely. In our research, this effect was even bigger than for overall satisfaction. In fact, of all the factors we looked at that drive great CEOs, this one was the number one factor. And so if you look at companies who've changed from being a 2-star to a 3-star company in terms of senior leadership, you'll see a huge effect in their CEO approval rating of about 38% on average. So it's a really big effect. And this can really mean different things at different companies, right? So at some companies, it might mean the CEO puts into place great leaders, and that's what leads to a feedback effect with being a high-rated CEO. But in other cases, what it might mean is that by being a great leader, they actually inspire other senior leaders in the organization to be the best that they can be. And it has this virtuous cycle, I guess. So the important lesson here is it's not enough to just deliver financial results at a company. You have to have great senior leadership also to be a great CEO. The third lesson from our study has nothing to do with senior leadership. It has to do with how you treat workers. It has to do with whether your employees feel like they have a natural career arc or whether they feel like they are in a dead-end job, and whether they feel like they are paid fairly for the work that they do. So what we found in our research is a clear, powerful statistical link between career opportunities ratings at companies and the pay and their assessment of the quality of senior leadership. And this completely makes sense when you look at the research on what really keeps people satisfied in their job. Career opportunities, feeling like you have an arc, feeling like you're not just stagnating, that always ends up at the top of the list for the research. So it's no surprising that we find it here also. One example that I think terrifically illustrates the importance of career opportunities is Kathy Engelbert at Deloitte. So Kathy has had an incredible career. She began at Deloitte 30 years ago, back in 1986. So Ronald Reagan was still in the White House, and Kathy was starting her first job at Deloitte. And she worked her way up through the ranks. In 2015, she took over the CEO position. So someone like that understands almost instinctively the importance of providing great career opportunities for people. And if you look at Deloitte's career opportunities rating on Glassdoor, they're among the best companies. And Kathy is one of our highest rated CEOs. And so the big takeaway from this is when you look at the data on great CEOs, what it's telling you is it's not enough to deliver financially. It's not enough to have great senior leaders. You also have to cultivate engaged employees by developing career paths and fair pay for them. People hold the CEO responsible for that. And when you think about your own experience, if you've ever felt like you were in a dead-end job and you couldn't move ahead, did you think that the CEO had anything to do with that? Yes, they do. Because absolutely, if anything is on the CEO's plate, it's figuring out how to make the best use of their workers and keep them engaged throughout their career cycle. And so our research shows that is in the data as well. The fourth lesson from this study, this is lesson number 4, is definitely the most surprising result from our research. I did not expect to see this when we ran the numbers, and it is about work-life balance. Everybody loves work-life balance. Everybody thinks it's important. I have a life outside of my job, believe it or not, and as do all of you. But what our data show is that people value other things also, and people seem willing to sacrifice work-life balance in exchange for a higher mission, for great leadership. They are willing to do the extra effort if it's toward a greater cause. In our research, we actually found a negative relationship between work-life balance and CEO approval rating. So what that means is if we looked at where the really high-rated CEOs were, they very often were at companies with low work-life balance. And the opposite is true also. And I thought that was really surprising until we thought of a great example that illustrates this, which is Jeff Bezos at Amazon. So Jeff Bezos is a perfect example of this pattern we see in the data. Jeff is one of the great visionaries in the world of CEOs. Think of the name Amazon for the company. So Amazon, the largest river in the world, Amazon got its name from him wanting to have that company be the largest river of goods to consumers. Like from day one, that was his idea. I'm going to create a company that's that big. Like the hubris of that is amazing, right? But he totally delivered on it. And today that's what he's got, and his people follow him religiously for that reason. So if you look at Amazon, I know there's been some publicity about them in the last year. Amazon, as a company overall, has better than average employee satisfaction compared to other tech companies. People seem happy at Amazon, but their work-life balance rating is below average, and their CEO rating is definitely above average. And that fits in nicely as an anecdote with that pattern that we see when we look at many CEOs and many companies. This is lesson number 5 from the research, and if I had to pick one of the lessons, this was definitely my favorite of all of them. What was powerful about the research we did is we were able to take CEO approval ratings and connect them with many different factors to see which ones were driving it. So we connected them with culture factors to see whether having great culture at a company was mainly what made people think a CEO was great. We connected it with financial factors of the companies to see whether it was just profitability of the company that made the CEO seem great. And we also connected it with personal characteristics of the CEOs. So their age, whether they were young or old, their gender, male, female, and their education, whether they had an MBA from a fancy school or not. And one of the other things we were able to look at was, were they a founder of the company? So were they was the CEO a founder of the company? Were they an external hire who came in later? Or whether they were internally promoted from throughout the organization? And very clearly in the numbers, founders had a very significant advantage over external CEOs or internally promoted CEOs. People like founders more. And I thought it was quite a large effect. And so think about your own experience. Have you ever worked for a founder? What is it that makes a founder seem different to you than an externally hired CEO? They're all doing the same job. Passion. What founders do differently is instinctively, they are talking about the mission and the vision. They automatically go to the big picture. Founders instinctively do that. To a founder, the company is like their child. And they are constantly going back from the weeds and talking about the big picture forest. Why is this company here? Why did we do this to begin with? Why do we get up every day? Why it matters. And if you've ever been in a career rut, like I certainly have different times in my career, if you're in a career rut and you're not satisfied where you are at your job, hearing your CEO get up and remind you of the vision, the big picture thing that we're all working on, that can make all the difference. It can have a huge effect. It just rekindles the fire inside people. And those people who do that, we see it clearly in the data that they get a big advantage. So a classic example of this is Mark Benioff from Salesforce. A great company. If any of you have seen Mark Benioff speak or had any personal interaction with them, that guy is obsessed with the mission and vision of the company. And passion just pours out of him. Mark is constantly telling this story about Salesforce, its origins, how we're changing the world. It's almost too much at times, but it's such a great illustration of what we see in the data. He's a founder, and he's one of the highest rated CEOs on Glassdoor with a 97% CEO approval rating. Now, I know what you're thinking probably. What am I supposed to do with this? Like, not everybody can be a founder. What do I do with this result? And my takeaway for you is not everybody can be a founder, but you can act like a founder. Once you understand what it is that's making founders act differently, you can start to emulate it, and you can change course. So I believe this is advice that any CEO can take to the bank. The last lesson from the study, lesson number 6, is kind of an inspiring message. And I wanted to leave you on an optimistic note. And it's really kind of a democratic message in a way. It's that when we looked at the personal characteristics of CEOs, their gender, their education, whether they were young or old, none of those factors mattered. They basically washed out, which is great news. That would be disappointing if we found the opposite. And what that's telling you is that when employees are really judging what makes a great CEO, they are not primarily swayed by an impressive degree or the gender or the age of the CEO. They're actually paying attention to these other factors that we talked about. So in our research, none of these factors seem to have any effect at all. And that means that although not all of us can be a Steve Jobs-like visionary, not all of us are going to be a great CEO. Every CEO can get better. We can become better CEOs using advice from this research, which I think is a great message. So those are the 6 big takeaways from my own research on what makes a great CEO. And I hope during this time that you have been cycling through in your mind CEOs that you have worked for, specific examples from your career. And you have tested out in your own gut whether these seem real or not. Are these just a statistical finding, or do these seem to capture most of what makes a great CEO in your life? I think if you reflect on it, you'll agree with my experience. This is mostly what has made me think a CEO was doing a great job or not. So here are the 6 lessons that you can carry home with you, right? First, you cannot be a great CEO if you ignore employee satisfaction. They're 2 sides of the same coin. Second, no CEO is an island. If you want to be a great leader, you have to surround yourself with other great people. You can't do it alone. Third, you cannot ignore career opportunities and fair pay for your workers. It will hurt your perception as a leader. Fourth, work-life balance is important, but if you are a visionary leader and give someone something great to strive for, people will gladly sacrifice it and go with you. Fifth, even if you can't be a founder, you can think like a founder. Talk about the big picture, the mission and vision every chance you get. It makes a difference. And finally, any person, regardless of gender, age, education, can become better at being a CEO, and it's right there in the data. So those are my 6 lessons for you, and I hope that when you leave the Glassdoor Summit and you return back and your CEO says, I don't know what to make of employee satisfaction. I'm not sure what it means to me. You can bring these lessons to them, and hopefully together we can have more workforces, more workplaces that are more employee-friendly. Thank you very much. So we do have time for questions. And so I would welcome any questions that the audience might have about this research, where to learn more about it, or what we found or didn't find. You have an economist on stage here, so now's your chance to ask me about the gold standard or something, Trump's economic plan maybe. I know you want to ask.
Hi, Andrew. I have a question.
Yes.
I've heard a lot at this conference over the past couple days about the importance of a positive candidate experience or interview experience. Have you done any research on that?
We have. So Glassdoor has a special window into what happens at job interviews, what works and what doesn't, and the delays that go on in interviews. We have done quite a bit of research on interviews, and one of the big projects we did is we looked at hiring delays, like are interviews taking longer today than they used to? And we have found a significant jump up that hiring, like the interview process workers are going through on average is taking longer today than it has in the past. And the basic conclusion for why is because employers are using more screens today for more technical roles. They're making them do skills tests, they're making them do more group panel interviews, presentations. Each one of those screens adds days to the hiring process, and we definitely do see that in our data.
Hi, Andrew. First, very dapper outfit. You were like the hottest economist.
Do you like my
ever.
pocket square?
I mean, the woman behind me said it, so I'm just going to let you know. But he's married. So, many people here are in the HR sort of talent recruiting realm. And, oftentimes the founder has kind of moved on from a company, and so you're looking to hire a CEO. What are some of the things, based upon your research, that talent executives, HR recruiters need to be looking for in a potential CEO that they bring on to make the most of company culture?
Sure. So when we looked at the 3 groups, founders, external hires, and internally promoted CEOs, right behind founders was internally promoted CEOs. So the ones who performed least good, the ones who were externally hired CEOs. On average, it's not that you can't be a great CEO if you're externally hired, but it seems to be that people who are internally hired and have had more time to absorb some of the company culture and have kind of become, it's had time to develop that passion, that definitely seems to matter. Basically, what I would be, so many CEOs actually come from a financial and accounting background. And I know that's a very common path. And I'm one of those people myself. Like I'm an economist. And so their temptation is to focus on the weeds, like really be down in the details, be focusing on the balance sheet, focusing on metrics. And I think when you're looking for a new CEO, you've got to find someone who can get back away from that. doesn't talk about that when they get up in front of the employees. You really have to have someone who paints the big picture and makes people feel like they're part of a ship that is going somewhere awesome. And that can make all the difference. I know it's just like a day-to-day thing, and some people find that natural to do, but others find it painful. They want to focus on the details. So that's the single best advice I could give.
Great, thanks.
Yes.
Hi. We've heard a lot about well-being today. I think we'll hear a little bit more soon. Have you started to look at the benefits reviews in Glassdoor and their correlations to best companies?
Yes, we have. So Glassdoor, about 2 years ago, launched a review where employees could tell us what benefits they got at work and could rate them and tell us how good they were, right? Because health insurance at one company is totally different than health insurance at another company. They may be good or bad benefits. Just saying you get free meals doesn't really tell us whether they're great free meals or not, and so on. So we have this giant global benefits database that's starting to fill out. We now have enough data that we can actually start doing research on it and figuring out what benefits really matter for employee satisfaction and which ones do people not care about that much. And what we find in the data is pretty clear. There's a lot of discussion today about headline-grabbing popular benefits like video games at work and dog-friendly offices and free meals. Now, I'm not saying those things aren't important. They obviously are. They obviously help attract candidates who are right on the margin. But when you look at really the big drivers of employee satisfaction, they still are the same core benefits they have been for 40 years. It's basically health insurance, paid time off, and retirement. And those three core pillar benefits should not be neglected. So when companies fall on hard times and they're thinking, I need to make adjustments to our benefit packages, we can't afford all the benefits we used to, there's a temptation for them to cut like those core things. Like they might think, well, we could save a lot if we adjusted our retirement plan. But the research is totally clear. Like that is a huge mistake. Like they should absolutely emphasize those core benefits and not forget that when they start to move on to more, non-traditional things. Yeah.
Hi, Andrew. Robert Homan yesterday was talking about your research on satisfied employees and how that impacts companies from a financial perspective. I thought it was really interesting. Can you just talk a little bit more about the research on that?
Yeah, very briefly. That is the big question. That's like the holy grail, this question of, does employee satisfaction matter for the bottom line? And when I started the research group at Glassdoor 2 years ago, that was the first question we tackled. Everyone wants to know that. So what we did is we looked at companies who had been named as best places to work. So this is Glassdoor's annual award where we highlight companies with great culture, and high employee satisfaction. And we looked at their performance of their stock over time compared to just like the typical company. And we did it in several different ways to try to make sure that we were, that we weren't just picking and choosing. We tried many different kinds of portfolios. And when we look at the numbers, best place to work companies totally dominate the S&P 500. Like they are typically great investments. And there's been other academic research since then using Glassdoor data to basically confirm the same result, which is that there is this strong relationship. And it's not just a correlation. There's some academic research out there which identifies a causal link that runs in the direction from great employee satisfaction to the bottom line financial performance of companies. This really shouldn't surprise anyone here. Most of us work in services, right? We work in the service industry where people are the things that are doing the production. We're the productive output. We produce all the output as people. If we are unsatisfied, we're not going to be performing at our optimum place. And it's going to show up eventually in how well the business is performing, and they're going to get squeezed out by competition. So most of this research is available at glassdoor.com/research. People can dig through and see that. I'd be happy to share more of that with you if someone wants to reach out to me. Yeah. I think we have time for one more.
Okay. We hear a lot about CEO pay and employee morale. Does your research go into that at all?
I am so glad someone asked me about CEO pay. So. This study we did that I showed you some results from, I of course can't show you the full study. Every study has many, many results in it. We did look at CEO pay. We looked at whether the compensation of the CEO affected their approval rating once you controlled for all those other factors. And in every model that we ran, it's clear a negative link. Higher CEO pay is negatively linked to CEO approval ratings on Glassdoor. So the highest paid CEOs did face a penalty, and that employees seemed to notice that that their pay was high, and they dinged them for it, and they got lower CEO approval ratings. But what is important to note in our research is that that effect basically disappeared when there was better company culture with more satisfied employees. So that's the message. You can't have high pay and unsatisfied workers. All right, that's all we have time for. Thank you very much. So glad to be here.